Having dyslexia, having ADHD, nothing changes for me. It's just understanding myself, which is why, like, if it's diet or it's fitness, whatever, I just like to know what's going on so then I can deal with it. If I'm not in a good mental state, I would like to know that so I can do something about it. The slight problem I have is I don't believe that everyone can run a business. I don't believe that, like, the characteristics of what I think you need to have to do it. I don't believe that people can start, but there's a reason why 1 in 10 businesses fail in their first year and all those math stats. There is reasons for that. It's not just to do with the economics and the government. There are reasons around it, the way I see it. Celebrating wins is a big problem I have.
Okay.
Yeah, so I really struggle to celebrate good things, which is weird. Like, I just, whether we win a client or whether we do some great work or whatever it might be, I couldn't care. And that's a general emotion. I'm just a bit like, cool, what's next?
Hi, I'm Karen Pollard and welcome to the Challenger CEO podcast. I've got an amazing guest with me today. I am joined by Olly Fawcett, who is the founder of 303 Media and Plus. So I'll get Olly to introduce himself and tell us more about him.
Good morning, how are you?
Good. How are you, Olly?
Very well. Thanks for having me. That intro is spot on. You've nailed that. I love it.
Thank you.
No, thanks very much for having me on. As you said, obviously I've founded 303, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, which is a creative performance agency. And yeah, I had a bit of a long journey of running a business for like 9 years now, which people watching this will probably look at me as a child, and I still am. So yeah, I'm really excited to talk about a lot of things today.
Fantastic.
But yeah, thanks for having me on.
Great, excellent. So for anybody who doesn't know about you and haven't heard of you,
quite a lot of people probably.
So what's your elevator pitch then?
I guess my elevator pitch is I founded a business 9 years ago, which I would say has been a nice success. I now run a business which employs about 25 people. We work with some of the coolest premium brands in London and the UK and the world. And yeah, we focus on creative-led performance. So we create content for brands, we shoot content, and then we also serve it out to their audiences and build their businesses through multiple channels within digital, including paid, organic, email, etc. So that's what I get up to, but I've obviously had a few fingers in a few other pies and had some other businesses along the way. Some of which failed terribly, some of which I've left and moved on from. And yeah, 303 is kind of my baby at the moment, and what I'm kind of growing and building. But yeah, kind of excited to see the next 10 years almost.
Yes,
it should be cool.
Definitely. And you've got a massive team under you.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that, because where did you start and where have you landed now with all that?
Yeah, sure. So I started from like basically a bedroom. So I guess a bit of context to the story. When I was at school and kind of at that early age, I don't know if people remember in the UK the kind of elevated university prices, which went through the roof, and I think there was riots on the street and that kind of thing, which is obviously a scary time. I was sort of a year or so below that happening. So by going to uni, I would be paying, I think, 30 grand a year. I don't even know how much it costs, but it's around that, right? And at that point, I remember sitting, I think I was on holiday with some family, and everyone was like talking about it, and we were looking on this TV back home, and there's literally like what's happening in the central London and whatever. And I was like, I'm going to uni, like that just doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to pay that amount or whatever. I don't want that debt. I looked at it that way, and I kind of made my mind up at that point that actually I would have to do something else. And I didn't really have like, massive aspirations to be starting a business at that point. I just didn't have any other options really. So fast forward a little bit, I had that in mind. I was like, I'm not going to follow what people are doing. And I kind of started to ask my friends, like, why are you going? And they're like, I'm going to do geography at uni. I'm like, but you play like rugby all weekend. Like, why do you want to? I just didn't understand it. I couldn't put myself in a place where I understood why we'd make that decision, which hindsight now, a lot of people are like, oh, I get it, which I was like, kind of makes me laugh a little bit, but not to say I was right. And I think, if you're going to go operate on someone's heart, you probably need to go learn how to do it. But equally, there's some stuff which I think there is more resource in the world that isn't a university to learn. So yeah, kind of got to like a college place, and I remember very vividly one day 2 classes, one of which I was in, being kind of put in a room together, 60 kids. It's 3 hours of learning how to apply to universities and what you need to do. And I was like, cool, I'm not going, so what do I do? And I was literally just put in the room next door by myself. And I think I played Flappy Birds for like an hour. And then after that, I was like, what am I going to do? A little bit of panic, a little bit of like, oh my God. Like, and I think when you're young, everything is the worst thing ever. Do you know what I mean? Like everything is terrifying. Like exams seem terrifying, all that sort of stuff. So I just thought, well, if I can start a business that does something and I can get people around me. That was also a big concern, obviously, to your question around team, of like, how can I get people on this journey? I have no money, I have no experience, I have no case study, CV, anything. What can I do to convince people? And that was kind of like an exciting challenge. At the time, I was like eating a sandwich and drinking green tea. So I said, well, I'll call it Green Tea Productions. And we'll go and make theatre shows, and we'll go and make films, and we'll go and shoot content, and it'll be really cool. This is the time, this is like 2012, 2013. Olympics had just happened. Instagram, it was 3-4 years old. Like, there was things happening. Twitter was at its big point. There was like action, right? There was things going on. So I was like, okay, fine, let's start in theatre. Got a few people around me to kind of like go, right, we're going to do a theatre show, we're going to do our own thing. And we kind of speeding up this story slightly. We found a script from a local writer who's at a local theatre, and we basically put on theatre shows throughout the UK, Edinburgh Fringe. But we sold out a lot of those shows because we used Twitter ads. So I learn how to be a creative, learn how to make content, shot like a trailer, shot some stills, etc., ran them on Twitter ads, and we went to the Edinburgh Fringe and we had like sellout shows and big productions didn't, and we had basically used Twitter to sell out our shows. So that taught me, right, there's something in this. There's something, the idea of selling something online, which is obviously the foundation of what social is now, or at least what everyone uses social for. So I basically did that, and I was like, the people that were with me, some of them were on gap years, some of them decided to go to uni, one of them became a really well-known actor called Finn Cole, who's in like Peaky Blinders and stuff, and Fast and Furious. Still speak to him every so often, but he's busy traveling the world. So, you know, people went off and did their different things, and I was like, cool, I'm just going to do this for brands. And I spent about 3 or 4 years learning and adapting myself into all the skill sets of what an agency is. So I had like my own version of university for like 3-4 years, which was really cool and really stressful, but I was just working for brands and developing things out, which is why when you think of my business being 9 years old, it kind of includes a really long period of learning. Yeah. Because my mindset was, if I'm going to build a business, I want to do every single job. I have no qualifications or background. I need to learn how each job works. So now today, when we've got 25 members of staff, whatever it is, I've done everyone's job in some way. Obviously, people are much better than I was, but like, I've been a creative. I've done like 3 shoots in a day. I've run social ads. I've run a social media account. Like I can engage with our team and have a conversation with them about something. But I've also done client services. I know what it's like when a client's screaming down the phone with you. Also, when their client's really happy. Like I've experienced those things, which for me is really important to do. I think in kind of a young age, but also any business, is understand what the limitations, restrictions, and opportunities are within your team. And that's kind of how I valued it. So yeah, that's kind of got me to where we are today. And we now employ a team and we do some cool things, I think.
Fantastic.
I hope we do.
And how would your team describe your leadership style?
Chaotic. I think I'm a big believer in like daily and weekly progress. I would definitely say I'm self-aware. I would like to think I am. You know, I don't think anyone that is around me would say that you're not self-aware. I've definitely in my leadership style had moments of like quite heightened arrogance that I know best and not listening to people, and I've learned from that massively. And I think that as CEOs or founders, like I'm a self-imposed CEO, right? I made myself a CEO. Like that's how it works. Yeah. You know, like I'm not the CEO. I think when you're CEO of like 2-person agency, sometimes it's a bit like you don't need to be a CEO yet. But when, you know, 20 plus people, it's the volume of people that makes you that, gives you that title. I believe that, you know, experience sometimes doesn't matter. But when you're self-imposed, when you've given yourself that role, you've got to have a certain level below you. That's just how I look at it. Yeah. But I think leadership style is very chaotic. I'm a big believer in speed and constantly trying to move forward daily, if not weekly. Which is draining for sure. Like 303 is not, I would say, like, and this is obviously making sure that we can still hire some great people. Like I always say to people in interviews, like, this isn't easy. It's not like a come in, fit into the background and do your thing. Like we look at everything all the time. We are underdogs. I guess why I'm on this podcast, but like we're trying to challenge ourselves. So like we don't have time for slow progress or whatever it might be. We do have time for people making mistakes, but learning from them. You know, that's how we value those sorts of things. So I think, you know, I try and be involved with the team and as much as I can. I've always had slight trust, you know, ways of working, I guess I'll call it. Sometimes I'm saying I will give that one bit of trust, and if it's broken, I'm sometimes a bit like, it's hard to recover. But yeah, I think my leadership style has kind of evolved, but I definitely think over 9 years, it's never been perfect, right? Yeah. Like it's always had its challenges, but chaotic, excited, I think, you know, hopefully trustworthy is a word I would try and use, but I know that, you know, running, sometimes when you're in your 30s and you're working for a 26-year-old, you're a bit like, who the fuck is this guy? Which I totally understand and I try and be aware about. But giving people opportunities is always a big thing for me, because no one, I wouldn't be where I am if people didn't give me some.
Yeah. Do you experience a lot of ageism?
For personally, I have done in the past. I guess like I kind of like celebrate my age throughout my life. I've walked into like pictures in shorts and a hoodie because like there's no point hiding it. Like I'm not going to walk in a shirt or that kind of thing. I had a few part-time jobs when I started my business. One of them was on Jermyn Street in London, which is like the gentleman's street. I don't know if you know it. And I was working selling hats, and there I wore a suit, and I've had that professional environment stuff. I was there every Saturday and a few days during the week when I was at college, but that wasn't really a job because I was kind of like partly running the shop with this other guy. So it was I didn't have anyone to report to as such. Like it was a bit more free, and then obviously I started doing my thing. So I don't know what it's like to have a boss, which obviously makes things hard. But I think throughout the years there's been opportunities where, there's been moments where people have definitely looked at me as like, this guy's like a kid. I think though that with the work I do, being a little bit younger has its advantages. But I also think now where we are, if you're super young, like if I was 17 in 2023, I think I would have more challenges than I did in 2013. Do you know what I mean? Because I think what people expect from agencies, and I grew up as the agency, as the industry grew. So I was kind of like parallel in its growth. So when I first started, it was like a young man's game, and it's now got a little bit older. You've now got agencies and businesses that are run by, older generations who are really good at what they do. And the space, like, Google search as an ad channel has been around for a long time. It's nothing new. Things like TikTok are a little bit different, right? So I think age is always played against me sometimes, but it's also sometimes works in my favor. I kind of look at it as I can't really hide it, especially with like the way I talk or the way I dress or whatever like that. I can't really change it, so I kind of just look to embrace it, because I think that's the best thing to do.
That's your personal identity and your brand. You own it.
I hope so.
Yeah. What are you most proud of that you've achieved?
Starting, I think, is the biggest thing I always go back to. I think like now, like my business has always had challenges. Like we've always had, stuff goes wrong all the time. There's fires probably happening right now back at the office. Like it just will be, like it's just the nature of running a business. And I've gone through some hard stuff for sure, but starting is the hardest. Scaling is hard. And we, like in 2021, we scaled like 12 to 15% month on month as a business. So like we've gone through that mad growth, right? And that was like hard and had challenges, but it wasn't like, it wasn't as hard as personally just starting. And I always tell the story of that, like being in a room and just starting a company based on a drink, right? And then going for it. But like that moment was the hardest by far. And I would say that being proud of starting something is always great. Actually, do you know today is like National Quitters Day or something? Like this is the day, I think, of recording on this, where like most people quit their resolutions, because there's that idea of like starting something and then being consistent. And I think consistency is hard, but I think starting is the hardest. Quitting your job, starting something new, all those things. And I would think that for me, no matter how much money I make personally or what I achieve or the brands we work with or anything like that, I still just go back to like being proud of myself to have the confidence to start something. Because I had everyone against me. Like I was not bullied is a strong word, but like people took the piss, right? And like, people do. They're like, now starting a business is sexy. Back then, which makes me sound really old, it wasn't that cool, and it was filled with like doubt, and like especially in kind of my world, it was like, why are you doing that? Go and get a job at KPMG, go and get a job at UI, you should be good at maths to succeed. Like those were some of the things. And I'm super dyslexic and ADHD, so like that's not going to happen, or at least not then. So yeah, I think starting is, anyone that starts something new or makes a change, I think is something they should be super proud of, because going against the grain, as per this podcast, is always hard.
Yes, definitely. And you mentioned two words, ADHD and dyslexia. How has that impacted your personal and professional life, and how's that molded where you're today?
So when I was younger, like my schools, when I was at school, so I'm talking like 11 years old plus, maybe even younger, to be honest, like they started to be on the crust of kind of trying to find out who had dyslexia, and like they sort of saw it, and you would do tests for extra time, excuse me, and all that sort of stuff. And I think in my whole education, I was tested in school about 5 times and outside of school about 5 times in total. And in the dyslexia thing, my parents were just like, we just want you to know know as much as you can about yourself so you can understand your brain's chemistry. Because having dyslexia, having ADHD, nothing changes for me. It's just understanding myself, which is why, like, if it's diet or it's fitness, whatever, I just like to know what's going on so then I can deal with it. If I'm not in a good mental state, I would like to know that so I can do something about it, right? So when I was younger, I was like not dyslexic, severely dyslexic, kind of dyslexic, not dyslexic. It was just a bit up and down. And that's because now it is different, and that's great. And I'm really happy by that. And that's kind of down to like government stuff, which I think is, you know, as much as we won't go into it, but like I think there's some good stuff that's going on there. But I had a bit of a mixed feeling of what it was. And I was also kind of at the end of that period of time where it was a really bad thing. Now it's kind of cool to be dyslexic and it's kind of cool to be ADHD. And I get that and I understand why. I just think though that what the community are trying to do, community makes it sound a bit intense, but like, you know, what LinkedIn are trying to do, what Twitter are trying to do, what influencers are trying to do, I guess, is make sure people feel welcome into that space. Because it can be a bit terrifying to say one day you can wake up with ADHD and feel absolutely fine. The next day you could wake up with terrifying anxiety or stress or not understanding.
Yeah.
And there are so many amazing people that are deemed a success that have those conditions, and people look at them and go, great. But then I also look at them and go, yeah, but they've also got these other things as well. It doesn't mean you're going to be successful. It doesn't mean you're going to be a failure. Yeah. Understanding is like the most important thing. I have a lot of people that work for me that are really dyslexic. And I guess me being quite open about it, I hope provides an environment where they feel confident.
Yeah.
Especially when like their co-workers are being like, you spelled January wrong. And you're like, yeah, but I'm, you know, and I can kind of relate with that. The one thing that I struggle with the most, which will probably be seen in some podcasts and like this kind of content is the stutter that I like kind of adopt sometimes. And that basically comes from my brain working too fast for my other senses. So the reason why I can't write or read is because if I take a sentence, my brain's at the end of it, but my eyes are at the start. So basically what has happened, and same with writing, same with talking, my brain is thinking 3 or 4 words or sentences ahead, and then everything else is farther behind, which is where my handwriting looks like I'm like a 3-year-old, and I can't read out aloud that well. I've tried to get better at it and everything like that, and that provides insecurities. Like if I stand in front of my team on a Monday and I stutter and I slip on my words, I get a bit like, oh, this is a bit, you know, do people think I'm an idiot? Like, do people think I can't do it? So there are those preconceptions that I think people get, but for me, like I've obviously tried to go against so much. I've kind of got to the point where I don't really care what people think as much as I do. I think everyone does care in some way, but like I try not to care, and I'm really open about it. That for me was a really big kind of sign of cure to the stresses is telling people on a podcast, telling people in person, like speaking to clients about it. Like if I do it loads, I'll be like, sorry, I'm stuttering because of this. And it just being a bit open about it for me was great and really good to do. I never had like a stutter. I never got to that point, but it comes from the ADHD and the dyslexia just blending all together like a smoothie mixer in the brain, and then where it's get to. Yeah. What I also noticed was like the creative side, I guess, of what we do, like being able to visually see creative stuff is obviously connected to it. So that's an advantage. Being able to creatively think about problems is another advantage. So there's loads more advantages. Yeah. I think in 2023, being able to write on a piece of paper isn't as much of a like pro as being able to think about something creative. So it's a blessing in disguise. But early years, and if anyone's going through that kind of thing that I know still happens, it's just like try and understand yourself, because I think that's a great way to grow and move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it helps the fact that your parents had that approach in guiding you through that transition as well. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. They were just like, I think family, I think we had like a few family friends and stuff who had like started to be like, it was a discussion, you know, started to find out that they were dyslexic, whatever. ADHD is pretty crippling for people. I don't have it at a point that I think is, I would say crippling. I know people that have it at a point that's quite crippling and quite like hard to work with every day. There's obviously medication. I tried the medication thing for a week. It was the worst week of my life.
Really?
Yeah, like not at like a mad scale, but like the medication, this was in my teens. I think people use it at uni now. It's called Ritalin. But people use it at uni to like concentrate, and I'm like, that's not a good idea. But yeah, I had that for a while, and it's you're really playing with the chemistry in your brain, and that just didn't work for me. Yeah. And I much prefer working with stuff that is a long-term solution. It's a bit like extra time or getting a laptop at school or all these sorts of things. I was like, great, but you're not working on a long-term thing. You're trying to get me through an exam. And that's where I did work. I've got an E in business at A-level, but I've got a business, so it doesn't really make sense. But equally, I failed that because I couldn't remember stuff because my memory's really bad. So there's lots of things there that kind of tie into the education world. I'm not a big advocate for education as a thing in terms of obviously learning, but like the system, I think it's hard, but I also just think that it's an impossible task. Like I think it's kind of spiraling out of control where I don't really see where the solutions are. So it's that classic thing of saying, I don't agree with it, but I don't know how to fix it. That's kind of how I look at it for me personally, because I'm like, I don't know how I would even try and make that easier for people with ADHD, people with dyslexia, whatever it might be. It's at such a scale that it's kind of an impossible problem. So I think when everyone's kind of shouting and screaming at governments about it, I get it, but what do you want to do then? Like, what do you think the solution is? Like, it's that classic thing of if you're going to argue with someone, at least come in with something you think is useful. Otherwise, there's no point. So yeah, that's one of those things that I think is difficult.
Definitely. And I think that's a whole different discussion anyway.
There is, yeah. There's another podcast there.
Does the ADHD and dyslexia part of your persona, does that give you imposter syndrome?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think it does. I mean, I've never really I try not, through my early years, I really tried to evaluate myself too much, and I felt that very limiting. So, self-pressure is probably the biggest thing I do in terms of just applying so much pressure onto myself that you break. So I think there's ways of trying to look at it, but the way I try and work is if I want to be upset about something, I'll be upset about something. If I want to be happy about something, I'll be happy about something. Like allow yourself to do those things. It's like if team get upset with me in terms of I'll have a meeting with someone, I can tell they're down, they start crying. I'll be like, it's okay to cry. And I hate when people apologize for crying, because I'm like, let your emotions be your emotions, because otherwise we're not human beings, we're robots. Yeah. So for me, I've really gone through that journey of applying too much pressure, stressing myself out, overthinking, imposter syndrome, all those things. I try and just keep it as level as I can, because with the way I work, I'm up and down, up and down. Yeah. Even doing this, I could have woken up this morning and felt really down. I kind of woke up and I'm in a good place. But you can wake up really down. But that's not just ADHD and dyslexia. That's human beings. That's what we do, right? You wake up and you have a bad day. That a classic saying of waking up on the wrong side of the bed. So yeah, I think for me, I've definitely experienced it, but I really try not to put the pressure on. That's the biggest thing, because I think people over-pressurize themselves, and I'm definitely guilty of that. I think all founders and CEOs are. You expect the world of yourself, and then when it doesn't happen, you're crippled. Yeah. Celebrating wins is a big problem I have.
Okay.
Yeah, so I really struggle to celebrate good things, which is weird. I just, whether we win a client or whether we do some great work or whatever it might be, I couldn't care, and that's a general emotion. I'm just a bit cool, what's next? It's really quite painful to work with, and I've definitely spoken to my team about it so many times. They're like, do you even care that we did this great thing? And I'm like, I do. I just naturally don't show that I do. So that's something I've been working on for a long time, and will continue to do so, because it's important to celebrate small wins. That's what makes life good, But that's always been a struggle, because I'm always thinking about the next thing. So yeah.
So what feeds you then?
I think the energy of the process, feeling like we're moving forward, is what I just thrive off. If I feel like I'm going backwards, it really sits badly with me. And moving forward can be anything. It could be a few more people following us on Instagram, or it could be another member of the team. It could be that client growing. It could be shooting that bit of content better than we shot the last piece. There's so many things, right? Yeah. So it's the progression and momentum are what I love. And I've always had a fear that I'll get gold medal syndrome. I've always had that slight worry about it, that if I sold 303, or it got to a point of something that I think is successful, that you turn around and be so I really try and enjoy the journey, but it's really hard to do, because I've spoken to a lot of people that have exited companies, or they've changed something in their career, and they're I just wish I enjoyed the process more, and regret that I didn't just enjoy the day to day, as opposed to constantly working to try and get to the end goal. Yeah. That's the bit that I always worry about and think about, because I think, especially after 9 years, if one day I just turn around and go, I should regret those last 9 years or those last 10 years, that would suck. Yeah. So yeah, I think that would be my biggest one, the biggest couple.
Yeah. Where do you take your counsel from? Because you're obviously the self-imposed CEO. So who's your mentor? Who's your role model? Who's your go-to?
I think I've got like a couple of people personally. It's arrogant, but I would definitely try and listen to myself first. I think that's one thing we don't do is we doubt ourselves too much. When I say we, I'm kind of putting myself in this bracket of CEOs, but you know what I mean. That's one thing I think is sometimes misled, is just like actually understanding and really listening to yourself and listening to the gut, listening to the heart. That's kind of the first thing I do. So I know I'm sure in my decision or my thought process. I've got a non-exec chairman, a guy called Chris Donnelly, who has built a very successful agency called Verb and is now working on an amazing business called Lottie. He's like me, he's dyslexic, he's ADHD, he started a business 10 years ago from his bedroom. Like we're same sort of journey and like there's amazing counsel there. Obviously family are great. I think the one thing that's hard at the level of running a business, and I'll just say running a business, not even CEO, but if you're in a position of a startup, if you're a one-man band, whatever, there's some stuff that no one else will really understand unless they've done it. And that is, again, seems arrogant, but the problem is that the stuff that happens in running a business, like we could talk about things in running businesses that we would both understand really what it feels like. And it's that sympathy, empathy thing. But the thing that I think I've struggled with over the years is speaking to my friends who don't run businesses, and some of them do, some of them don't. And like my girlfriend or whatever, she or they can be so understanding and supportive, but they don't truly understand it. And that's really difficult. And I think that comes across in other ways of life, but that's the challenge often I have of like, you know, if I need to fire someone, or that sounded really brutal, if we need to let someone go, or if someone has come and left the business or whatever it might be, or wants to leave, like those are sometimes challenging, or, you know, a client's going to leave, or we haven't won a deal, or I don't know, whatever it might be. Sometimes I'll speak to my mates who are working in finance or working in property or whatever it might be, and I'm like, you guys don't really understand this fully because you don't understand the implication or the bigger picture and whatever it might be. So that sometimes is a struggle. So having people that have worked in it is always great. But I think my favorite kind of quote, which is actually from Chris, annoyingly, if he listens to this, because you'll love the fact it's from him, but he wrote it on like a message to me not too long ago, but he said, don't take criticism from those who you wouldn't take advice from. And I think that for me is quite a big one. I don't really like the one-off quotes that much, but that one I was just like, holy shit. Because like how many times in my life have I listened to someone's criticism on what I'm doing, and I wouldn't ask them for advice on something that I know about. And that's something that I just like saw, and I was like, oh damn, he's right. Yes. But it really sat with me, and I think that's something I'm kind of taking into the next period of my life a little bit, because you can listen to a lot of people's advice, especially like get rich gurus who tell people this is how to do this, or this is how to run a business, and they haven't done it before. It's a bit like, hold on, you wouldn't listen to advice from them, but they'll tell you that doesn't work, and you'll listen to it. That's it. So that's sat quite nicely with me. Yeah,
and it's about valuing and really appreciating where that opinion comes from. And if you're not going to value that, then what's the point?
100%.
Something you touched on there has just pulled me in a bit around the advice from the gurus. And obviously, gurus. Yes, and obviously being so entrenched in the world around social media, there's this whole concept around celebritized entrepreneurs. Why does the word entrepreneur grate on you so much?
So I wouldn't call myself an entrepreneur. I don't think like publicly. I think privately I probably would, because I would understand it. I think I love the fact that right now anyone can start a business. I love that. It's brilliant. I didn't have that necessarily 10 years ago, and I love that right now. Fantastic. I love it. Great culture. There's a little bit of too much hustle around it. So like whatever, do your thing. The slight problem I have is I don't believe that everyone can run a business. I don't believe that like the characteristics of what I think you need to have to do it. I don't believe that people can start, but there's a reason why 1 in 10 businesses fail in their first year and all those mad stats. There is reasons for that. It's not just to do with the economics and the government. There are reasons around it the way I see it. So I think for me, why entrepreneurship has come so sexy, and like I've got 5 businesses and all this sort of thing, the people that I know that are actually doing it, and there are some influencers that I've worked with who are doing it, and they are like smashing it, and I think they're great ways of operating. But like the people that are like, I'm an entrepreneur and I'm sitting on a beach in Bali and I'm making 20 grand a month and like whatever, honestly, fuck off. Like, because it's it just makes everyone else that's working really, really hard and actually giving up and sacrificing so much to even achieve that, it belittles what they do. And I've definitely been in that position where I've sat there and I've looked at other people and I've been like, these are all these like cool entrepreneurs and they're like millionaires and whatever, and they're making it look so easy, and they're like, just start whatever. I get the advice, but don't belittle actually what it takes to run a bakery or what it takes to even start a business. Like, I celebrate anyone that comes to me and goes, oh, you've got 25 people, but I've got 5. Like, I'm not your level. I'm like, dude, like, having 5 is harder than 25. Like, honestly, it is. Like, because you've got less people to help and whatever. Like, it's harder to be smaller. So I just don't like the fact that online, on social, we are trying to make it into something that it's not. And also we're not celebrating the real challenges that I think you have at an entrepreneurship level. And the word entrepreneurship, to me, in my mind, I just think about people who are faking it. That's where it doesn't sit with me. Whereas if I said I was a business owner, I believe that is more correct to what I do. I've obviously had a few businesses and like I've spread myself thin and whatever it might be, and I've got interests in investment, whatever you call it. So that is probably the word that people will describe me as, but like I would say I'm a business owner. Like I own businesses, I run businesses, and that's what I do. I don't just like sell crypto and like watch it crash and then, pop an NFT just to make it worth it, or whatever you want to do.
And you mentioned earlier that you've had other businesses in the past, some of which have failed and that. At what point do you know it's time to walk away?
Sorry for the audio people on the pouring water, I do apologise. Really thirsty today. So I had like a leather goods business pre-COVID, which was basically making like leather goods and selling online. It was a skill set I knew how to kind of build out. The bit where I know that it's worth walking away, and that business I had with a friend, and we just sort of fizzled it out, and it was, didn't lose any money, didn't make any money, whatever. It was a small little startup-y thing. The point that I know it's fizzled out is when there isn't that like fire inside of you when you wake up in the morning, and also like you don't think that it's one of the most important things in your life. Like 303 for me as a business, there's been moments where I could have walked away. Okay, there's been moments where like I could have given up, but and some of those are relatively recently. For me, I've always just listened to myself, like I said before, and gone like, do you really care about that possible payout? Do you care about like the easier life you could have? If there's a part of me that goes yes, I will do it. But up until today, there's not been a single part of me that's gone like, actually, I've always gone like, oh maybe, and then I go no, and that's the way I've looked at it. So yeah, I think that's happened over the years of like, should I give up? Should I quit? Whatever, this is not working. This is stressful. I think every entrepreneur and business owner that I respect has always said persistence is key. And I've seen that in my own career if I look back. So that's for me where it's kind of been like the right time to move on and not give up. But yeah, business is failing. If you don't like it, don't do it. I know that everyone always says I've got bills to pay, whatever, but like there are ways around that, and I get it, and I won't go into it now. But I think if you generally don't wake up and love what you do, and you're deciding to run a business, that's the time to walk away. You've got to trust your gut a bit more on it, and all those things can work themselves out. It might seem hellish in the moment, but there's always a way through. But yeah, it's the moment where like you've gone, and I sold a business last year, which was a small e-com brand in the car detailing space, which is a bit random, I know. But I had it with another guy who's, done very well for himself and has a level of influence within social. And we built the business up, and then we weren't really spending much time on it. We didn't have the passion for it. Had an opportunity to sell it, and we sold it. And it's coming back. And when it comes back, I'll probably support it because I want it to grow and rise and whatever it might be. The guys that bought it are kind of resetting it and building it back out. And that was my first kind of build and sell. Did I make millions like everyone thinks you do? Nope. Did I make some money? Yeah, I did. I know it was cool, and that was it. So that's just kind of how I look at it, really. It's I think so many people are. The one thing I think is a mistake in building companies to sell them is if your mindset is I'm building this to sell this soon, it won't grow. You've got to always have the mindset that I need to grow this as if I'm not selling it. Because I had a kind of a period in my life in the last sort of 3 years where I was focused on selling 303 in the next 10 years or whatever it might look like. I was like, I'm going to sell it, I'm going to sell it, I'm going to sell it. And that stopped it growing because I just became like, I'm going to sell what's currently there versus actually a growth mindset, which is I'm going to build this to be the biggest thing ever. And what happens. And I noticed the way that I would make decisions, my characteristics, how I think about the business, my energy, all shifted around from that. So it's like how you think about stuff is really important. But business is, at what point they actually fail, I think is an interesting conversation. Do you run out of money? Is it love for it? Like, you know, what causes you to close a business? I think is always an interesting conversation. I know a lot of big businesses that are like always battling cash flow or always dealing with problems, whatever it might be, but they're still deemed a success, especially in tech. Like, the amount of debt on some of these businesses is crazy. So yeah, I think it's just how you value whether a business is actually failing or whether it can be. I mean, Twitter was losing like $1 million a day, right? So like they've obviously got reserves to deal with it and set up. But looking at those things, I think is always interesting because I think people think, oh, I'm going to close tomorrow. Are you actually like, do you really know what that looks like? Is an interesting one.
And sometimes you have to cut back in order to grow. It's the same with gardening. So,
strip out the roses and new ones come out.
There we go.
I've not really done much gardening in my life. I've got plants.
How successful is your rate at keeping them alive?
Do you know what? I got an app that I like last year where it just tells me when to water them, and now they are flourishing.
There's an app for everything.
There is an app for everything.
Look, being an expert in the online space and having been through COVID where a lot of industries were digital laggers and generations were digital laggers and caught up. We've come out of the COVID slump and hump and this digital revolution. But we're obviously the UK and there's a global economy where there's a recession looming and hitting. And I often have this conversation about how business owners are best placed to control the uncontrollables rather than being hit with a ceiling of a payroll salary. What advice do you have and what do you see being the best way to survive going into 2023?
Sure. So I think a couple of things, not to say you're necessarily wrong. All I would say is that COVID was the biggest growth for online ever. And I think that people are still... I'll go into more of what you just asked, but there's one thing that we got to realize, especially when it comes to like the social landscape. Everyone's looking at Facebook, Twitter and Snapchat, getting rid of employees because they're failing. They're actually not. What they're going to is the similar rates of employees that they had pre-pandemic because the pandemic for the online world, crypto, e-com, platform, whatever you want to call it, social, it was the biggest boom we've ever seen and I think we will ever see for a period of time. Because everyone was online. Like I remember COVID, the beginning of it, almost like it was yesterday, because I just signed a lease on a new office and had to move into it. But like online sales for like small startups was going through the roof because everyone was buying online. Everyone was spending all their time online. So where we are now is kind of recovering back to where we were before. So 2019 levels with an economic impact. That's basically how I analyze today. There's some great positives to the space. And the positives for me are the way that platforms in social have evolved in this COVID pandemic. 2017, 2018, a lot of platforms were dying. Instagram was actually dying quite heavily. Snapchat was sort of dying. There were other platforms that weren't doing as well. TikTok saved the social space in ways that I think people don't realize in the way that people consume content. Because what platforms do, which is so brilliant, is understand human psychology. And that is something that even I don't really look into as much as they will. But they understand what people want to consume. And when TikTok kind of changed from Musical.ly and grew, what it became is an interest-based platform. And what that basically means is they serve content to people that they generally want to engage with. Not what they like, not what they comment on, what they actually want to engage with from a retention perspective and a shareability perspective. Because the platforms know that if you like something on Instagram, so if someone likes a podcast clip from you, if they like it on TikTok, let's just say, their intentions from a psychological perspective are less, whereas if they were to share it, because if they share it, they believe there's enough value that other people want to see it. So that is a higher intention and it values the content more. And that's where TikTok changed the game. Which is why Instagram and YouTube Shorts are now doing their thing, and short form video is the biggest thing in the world, and 2022 was the year of short form video. What I think we're going into, and this is like a social thing just generally, but where I think brands have got to understand, is that we're in a short form space. We're in a low ability to gain attention. Yet attention is the biggest value ever. Everyone wants to be famous for one reason, because the person with the most attention wins. 303, my agency, would be 10 times the size if everyone knew who it was. It's just facts. Like that's why everyone wants to be a celebrity, because you think you gain everything with it. You do gain so much from attention. Like the Kardashians, they've built what they've built because of attention. That is what people are buying into, and that's what is sellable. So what I think the kind of thought process for brands now, from my perspective, is going into this year, we have to tell stories and tell a narrative in the shortest period of time possible, which is where creators are the biggest people to listen to. Because the skill set that I think creators don't realize they have is the ability to tell someone information very quickly. So if I sit in a meeting with my team, I want to know the answers in 5 minutes. I don't want to know the answers in an hour. I think we can all resonate with that in some way, right?
Sure.
We want it quick and fast, and that's what we've become as humans. So what brands have got to do now is not just grab attention by posting on TikTok 5 times a day, is include narrative and information and value in a concise, informative manner, and that is what's going to lead to growth.
Yeah.
So 2022 was like the chaotic attention, post on TikTok and then post on Shorts and post on Instagram and change your strategy and everything like that. Brands are doing that, but actually what they're doing is just jumping on trends and trying to make noise. The growth opportunity is the narrative, the storytelling, how that feeds into brand and building brand. And that's where I think we're going into, which is, for me, really exciting because, that's going to be video. That's not going to be as much imagery. It's going to be podcast content. It's going to be audio format. Like, that's the next evolution. Where it goes from there, like, I don't really know. I think that it's going to be an interesting curve. I think that could be the setup we have for a little while. I think Web3 is kind of on pause right now. And I think Web3 will bring in different solutions to the way that we consume anything on social platforms or online. But I think that with the space and the economics of blockchain, that has meant that Web3 is going to have a bit of a slower ride than it thought. It's still growing, but I think it's going to be slumped. But that will feed into what we do. I think that the platforms are building things pretty big stuff in the background. I think there's a lot going on. And I think that everything we talk about when it comes to social is down to what we do as humans.
Sure.
So if you can identify how humans behave as a brand, you can hack it.
Yeah.
That's basically what marketing is.
Yeah,
like,
definitely. It is understanding consumer behaviorism. And align with that, obviously, there's a massive push on AI. And, as of yesterday, I think ChatGPT, the latest thing.
Premium, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Reached capacity, so their server could not handle taking anybody else on. How does AI fit into your business model this year?
At the moment, it doesn't really. I think that there's a clever opportunity when it comes to the thing about AI is that it's going off what is being fed into it, right? So that's how AI works. You feed it data, it understands the data and puts it back out. It's not like just making it out of nowhere. Like, I think people sort of think we're still living in like iRobot days with Will Smith. It's just not a thing. So like, I think that the AI is going to develop massively. I think, there's so many things when it comes to tech which are like so ahead of their time. I don't know that AI is yet. I think that ChatGPT and stuff like that, with the people behind it, I think it's going to become a part of everyone's life, not just mine. But I do wonder if people will adapt into the way of working. It's why most people don't understand crypto and Web3, because it's a different way of thinking. And I think for me, especially with ChatGPT, even like my team, like how they want to use it, like there's been versions of ChatGPT, how the flip you say it? I'll call it chat for now. There's been versions of it for a long time. Like there was one called Jarvis, which then changed to Jasper. That was around 2 years ago. Like they've been around. It comes into the hype and the attention of this work, of this technology that people will start to adapt into. I would argue that I think the reason why people love it right now is because there's a certain level of like ease to it and there's excitement and hype, which is exactly what happened to Internet 2.0, Internet 1, and crypto and Web3. So like, will it be a bit of a spike and then a dip down? I think it might be in 2023, but I think the evolution of it will come into play. Sure. It's a bit like VR headsets, or do you remember Google Glass? Like there's stuff like that where like you look at it and go like, this is it. It's happening. We're going to put chips in our heads. Like it's sometimes a bit too early. And I think it goes down to people adapting to it as much as possible. Sure. It's like Clubhouse. Like there's so many examples of like things in technology which people have gone, this is it. We're in it. This is the next thing. It's the next TikTok. It's the next Instagram. I don't know if ChatGPT is that. GPT, isn't it? Not BT. Yeah, is that?
BT, the phone provider.
Literally, yeah. BT are on me.
Something around that, because I think what you touched on is going to be very important for businesses, is around being able to nail that narrative.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can... You need the human brain, the human input and the creative side for that.
Yeah.
You work with a lot of challenge and disruptor brands, don't you?
Yeah.
What is your thoughts on the whole pioneer versus disruptor?
It's an interesting one. I think sometimes, it comes down to the marketing. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, that's what we've seen. I think, I won't mention the client names, but we have clients where like they've remarketed something that already exists and then they come across as a disruptor. I think what disruptor really sometimes means is how you can market a product into a space which masks it and pushes it into something that's new. So I guess this is one thing, especially with businesses, is like people have been through the same version of everything before. It's just altered and changed slightly, but it's the structure is the same in many ways. I think there are, like, for example, Chris, who is involved in 303. He started a business called Lottie, which is going to revolutionize the care home space in a massive way. And it's an amazing business. And the reason why everyone is really interested in it is because of that reason. He is a disruptor, right? Monzo, Tom Bloomfield, that is a disruptor business, a true disruptor business. I think that the marketing of a lot of our pioneer businesses and disruptor businesses often is just the way they market themselves. And that's really clever, which makes them a disruptor. So it's a bit of a weird one. Actual businesses and brands that I've seen that have done something that is completely new and different, very, very rare. And that's what I would call a unicorn. It's an Uber, it's a Monzo, it's a Facebook, it's maybe a TikTok, it's those sorts of things. It's not necessarily like another version of vegan meat. There are a lot of those, and they would call it like Beyond Meat is having a really hard time right now because their sales and shares are going down because there's other people coming into it, and people have realised actually this product has been around for 10 years, but it's only just coming, and that's because of marketing. It all comes down to attention. It all comes down to how you perceive yourself and how you enter spaces. I think when brands say they're disruptive, we used to, in our communications as an agency, we used to say we are for disruptive brands. We removed it because we would get a lot of interest and work with a lot of people who were not disruptive brands. And I realized that actually they are beyond unicorns, in many ways. I can think of a few unicorns that are really truly, but still no one knows about them. And that's because they haven't really elevated that marketing and done that. So I think it is one of those things that's just clever marketing. But I think there are some things that are really interesting and really, like, ChatGPT is not necessarily a disruptive platform because the technologies existed before. What they've done is elevated it and take it along. So, but they've marketed it really well, and they've managed to hack social and like used Elon and all that kind of stuff.
Fascinating.
So that's how I look at it.
Yeah. And what role do you see yourself playing in that?
303 is not necessarily itself a disruptive agency. We had a model that a lot of people sometimes think that everyone else has. So like we call ourselves a creative digital marketing agency, which basically means like within our team, we have actual creatives, videographers, photographers, people who can produce creative work. And then we have a digital team. Some agencies, and I'm not going to name our competitors and start slagging them off, but other agencies are digital agencies with creative abilities to be brought in-house. The biggest challenge in our business is collaboration and communication, which brings all of these people together, where a videographer on my team can understand what ROAS is on Facebook, and a paid media specialist can understand what a CTA is and how to make it look beautiful in a video or work in a video. So for us, we were kind of we were sort of disrupting the space, but no one knew of us because we've been terrible at B2B marketing. Like that's been a flaw in my business. Really good at marketing B2C and D2C, really bad at marketing B2B, which is why we don't do it for brands, because it's just a different way of communication and different way of using channels. Which is why you see now every founder of a business building a personal brand, because they're naturally not very good at being good at B2B or whatever it might be, which is why you see every agency owner doing podcasts like this because of that reason. So I think we have been disruptive, but we haven't reached that capacity and we haven't experienced the benefits of being disruptive because we've not been good at showing people what we do. And that's mistakes, and that's where we learn, and that's why we prioritize these things now.
Definitely.
So I think being disruptive is exciting and cool and sexy. Actually being disruptive is a very risky approach because you can get it very badly wrong and very badly right. So, it's a bigger gamble. But, for 303, we think that we offer something that's different to other agencies, the way we work, the way we use creative, the way we operate, the way we can work with other brands and be extensions of whatever. There are 10,000 agencies in the UK now. Most of them came out through COVID. I think pre-COVID, the numbers were like, this is like 2019, like 6,500, 7,000. Since COVID, gone up to 10,000. So like competitive as hell, but how do you cut through?
Yeah.
Isn't everyone a creative digital marketing agency? Well, no, they're not. Like, it's about those communications and the attention. So
definitely.
yeah, that's where we find the challenges for sure.
Good. Excellent. Well, I mean, Olly, I think we could probably do this for hours.
We probably could, yeah.
Do a 6-parter.
Yeah.
Is there anything we haven't spoken about that's burning on your chest that if you walk out the store, you'd be thinking, damn, I wish I said that?
I don't think there is. I think the only thing I would say for like the Challenger CEO part, I guess, of what this podcast is trying to do is really, I guess, what that means and what that means to people. I think, I love the name of the podcast because I think everyone as a CEO has got challenges ahead of them. But I think that, like I said at the beginning, when you asked me the question of the biggest pivotal moment, the starting is the most key bit, unless I doubt many CEOs of like Nissan are listening to this who have worked their way up through the ranks. Most CEOs are self-imposed and most of them are startups and they've built their own businesses. They are from the ground up people, right? And I think that's where I think that's an amazing achievement and something great to do. So many people want to do it, but if you want to be a Challenger CEO, I guess realize why it's called a Challenger CEO.
Yeah.
Why it's not just called a CEO, because I think it's one of the hardest jobs to get right. I think a lot of people try it, and I think it's really cool, and people must think it's cool to have it on LinkedIn, but actually it's kind of a bit of a curse in so many ways, and you've got to really want to do it do it, because otherwise it's crippling. Like it's really hard to do, and I think we all as self-imposed CEOs put ourselves in those positions. And we all do that for our own reasons and our own self-belief or whatever. But the moment you don't want to do it, don't put yourself through it, because I think it's really hard to do when you really don't want to.
What piece of advice would you have for anybody that would like to start their own business?
Probably persistence. I probably said it quite a lot during this episode, but I think persistence is the main thing. There's so many times where you will give up and it will get worse and it will get better. But being persistent, I think, if you're thinking of starting a business now, if you're listening to this, or you've already started and you're going through some challenges, everyone always wants to see what other people have done to give themselves reassurance. They go, what's Elon done? What's all these people? Go really look into just one person that you respect as another CEO or someone starting a business, and look at the challenges they've gone through. It can be anyone that you would deem success. I bet you the adversity they've had to go through is so high, and that comes through being persistent. Yeah. So I would say that persistence is the biggest thing you've got to get used to, and always have it in your heart of being like, I shouldn't give up because this person didn't give up and that got me there. Like, people always say to me when I talk about this thing with friends, they're like, oh, Richard Branson was bankrupt 3 times. I'm like, yeah, what do you learn from that? And they're like, oh, he knows how not to go bankrupt. I'm like, no, he knows how to be persistent. He knows how to keep going from there. Like, we can all associate ourselves with successful people, but often we just look at how much money they have versus what they've done to get there. There are so many examples we could talk about, but I think persistence is key.
Great advice.
Hopefully.
Great advice. Thank you. If anybody wants to connect and collaborate with you,
sure,
where can they find you?
Well, obviously head over to 303. It's 303.london, which we thought was a cool URL, and we couldn't get .co.uk because it was like 20 grand. But yeah, 303.london is my agency, and you can obviously find out more about us there. I'm quite active on LinkedIn and Instagram and TikTok, which is just Olly Fawcett, Olly, Olly, and then Fawcett like the taps. No association, unfortunately. Otherwise I probably wouldn't be sat here. But yeah, that's basically where I post a lot of the content. And yeah, my email is ollie@303.london, because I always respond to emails very randomly. So that's probably where you can find most about me.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great fun.
Yes.
Great way to start a Friday.
Great. Well, let's do this again.
For sure.